Okay, let's do this. Back in 2022, I started a brand new daily series in the month of September called SteamTember, which was a series where I reviewed one episode of Thomas & Friends every single day throughout the month of September. Throughout the first year, we got through the first 2 seasons of Thomas & Friends, along with the first 4 episodes of its sister series, Shining Time Station. That did really well for the channel. So naturally, we brought it back the next year, where we reviewed the rest of Shining Time Station Season 1 on top of Thomas & Friends Season 3 in its entirety. That didn't perform as well since it was more Shining Time Station than Thomas & Friends, but it still did relatively well for the channel. Again, from my perspective, it wasn't as fun as the previous year, but I still did have a lot of fun, kind of going crazy over the weirdness of Shining Time Station, and going even crazier over some of the more weirder aspects of Thomas & Friends Season 3.
And this year, we're going to be starting things off by looking at the entirety of Shining Time Station Season 2. Before ending things off with the first 10 episodes of Thomas & Friends Season 4. The final season to feature George Carlin as the U.S. narrator. So strap on in and make sure you got plenty of coal, because this is SteamTember 2024.
Okay, now this is going to be a very special episode of Shining Time Station. First of all, this is the Season 2 premiere. Second of all, this is a very special episode in the traditional sense. And that's because... It's a Halloween episode! And third of all, this episode makes changes to the show that I think are gonna be a little iffy. Season 2, Episode 1, Scare Dare, is notable for many different things. The first one is that this is the show's first official Halloween episode, even though it aired in November. Fuck! The other massive addition to this episode are all these sudden status quo changes that are delivered in the first minute of the episode. Matt and Tanya are writing to their cousins. They basically just deliver the ending of the Christmas special, where Mr. Nicholas goes back to his workshop in the North Pole, but unknown to us at the time, Mr. Conductor went with him to help. And so now Mr. Conductor's cousin, played by George Carlin, is now attending Shining Time Station instead. This was something that was unknown to me until watching this episode, because I had always assumed that all the Mr. Conductors, Ringo Starr, George Carlin, and eventually Alec Baldwin, were all just the same person. But no. Apparently, according to this episode, each Mr. Conductor are different cousins. So Ringo Starr is his own character, and George Carlin is his own character, and eventually Alec Baldwin will be his own character. They're just all called Mr. Conductor because why the fuck not? So yeah, Halloween episode, we are introduced to Tanya's cousin Carol, who wants to be an engineer, just like their grandfather Harry. Which is weird, because Harry is not in this episode. Stacy wonders where Matt's cousin Dan is, but I don't know, and then they leave. And then Dan shows up. Stacy asks where his costume is, and he replies,
I haven't got one yet, Aunt Stacy.
Where the fuck are these kids' parents? Like, I know that's a weird thing to ask in a kids show. You're not really supposed to ask these types of questions. Like, oh, why is everything in Pee-wee's Playhouse alive? Like, you're not supposed to ask these types of questions, you know? You're not supposed to know why the puppets in Sesame Street don't age, or how Barney gets his powers. Like, you're not supposed to ask these types of questions, but it's usually like with the magical shit. I'm asking questions about like the normal shit, like where are these kids' fucking parents? Because every time we see them,
Like, Matt's always with his aunt, and Tanya's always with her grandpa. Where are their parents? I don't know if they're even mentioned throughout the entirety of the episodes that we've seen. And my initial thought is that Matt's cousin was Stacy's son. That was my theory. But no, they're just completely normal. That's also Stacy's nephew. We keep different parents. The show, man. I gotta review 19, 20 more of these. But
Dan tries to find one and ends up in the shop, where he meets Harry's replacement. Dan is terrified of this man for some reason. It's probably a race thing, so he runs off. Meanwhile, Schemer is repainting rotten pumpkins to sell them as new ones, which is the most realistic thing this character has ever done. I'm really trying to throw in realism for the franchise about talking trains, aren't I? Stacy tells him to stop that shit, and Schemer's like, fuck you. We cut to the jukebox band, who don't play a song and are just chatting, so you kind of wonder what the point of this was, other than just filling time. So Mr. Conductor meets Dan and Carol for the first time and hides away. But he then reveals himself after they reveal themselves as Matt and Tanya's cousins. The kids ask him a lot of questions about both him and the island of Sodor. Mr. Conductor answers those questions and then tells them the story of, ooh, Percy's Ghostly Trick, one of my favorites. Later, an old lady notices a banana in Schemer's pumpkin barrel. Schemer says that she can't have the banana, and the two of them get in a little fight. So it turns out that Carol dared Dan to take the banana. Yeah, truly riveting television. Mr. Conductor asks if Dan has found his costume yet, but Dan says that he has no idea what to do. Then Mr. Conductor shows him the Anything Tunnel for the very first time. It's a special Halloween edition of the Anything Tunnel, which features tons of spooky public domain cartoons about how I'm not really scared. Hey, speaking of public domain cartoons, you hear that Mickey Mouse is public domain? I'm recording this in January, can you tell? Dan tells Mr. Conductor that he's afraid that if people know he's afraid, they won't like him.
And I was afraid of you and Kara until I got to know you.
This is literally the second conversation you've ever had with this child. Oh, and apparently her name is Carolyn, not Carol. I've been saying Carol the whole time, but I do not feel like going back through the entire video and redubbing it saying Carolyn, so fuck you. Anyways, Mr. Conductor is a cowboy now, and he tells the story of Percy and the Dragon. What's going on? I'm a dragon!
A dragon, a dragon. I swear I saw a dragon. A green and seething, fire-breathing monster is in sight.
So the rest of the kids dare Dan to go on inside of the machine shop. And so he goes inside of there. But the mere presence of an Indian man frightens him. Whoa, oh my god. Wait. Why? Just why? Anyway, he shows Dan some cool tribal shit, and now he's not afraid anymore. Schemer then decides to put on some spooky music on the jukebox, and the band plays a spooky song. But while Schemer is trying to get the quarter inside of the jukebox, the pumpkin on top of it ended up falling straight onto his head. And hey, I remember this episode of Mr. Bean. Also, there was an actual ghost in the jukebox machine. So, you know that Thomas story that they told that said that ghosts weren't real, there was nothing to be afraid of? Well, fuck that noise, because apparently ghosts are very real in this universe. Then again, this is also the same universe that consists of talking trains, sentient puppets that live in a jukebox, a man the size of a thumb who can travel between universes, and Santa Claus. So, are ghosts really that out of the question here? So the kids get back from trick-or-treating, but Dan scares them. But then Schemer scares the kids. But then Mr. Conductor scares Schemer. End of episode.
now I wanted to do this segment of the video where it's me instead of doing it with voiceover, because I truly feel like this is going to be a very important of the episode of the show moving forward. You guys remember the Blue's Clues episode where they introduced the character of Joe? For those of you unfamiliar, Joe was a character from the Nickelodeon preschool series Blue's Clues, who was introduced as Steve's brother. And basically the entire reason the character was introduced is because the character who played Steve, Steve Burns, wanted to leave the series to pursue other projects, which is what he did. They introduced Joe, they had him show up for a few more episodes, and then in Joe's first appearance, Steve revealed to the characters and the audience that he would be leaving for college, and therefore, Steve Burns would be leaving the series. As a kid, I remember this episode being a very emotional moment, knowing that we were never going to see Steve again, and it was very sad. And a lot of kids, including myself, were kind of heartbroken the fact that we weren't going to see Steve again. Now, apparently everyone forgot about the 100th episode where Steve actually did show up briefly, and Steve has made some appearances in the Revival series, like, a couple times, and even showed up in the recent movie, but still, many kids were left destroyed by that episode. And, Joe came along and became the new host for Blue's Clues, and many kids felt like it just wasn't the same. I personally didn't mind Joe. I thought it was a really entertaining host, but something that Steve had is something that couldn't really be replicated because it was 100% his own, and a lot of kids knew Steve. That is not our Steve. This got so bad to the point where, for Blue's Clues' 20th anniversary, Steve, in character, had to make a video basically apologizing for leaving the kids. Now, I bet you're all wondering, what the fuck does this have to do with Shining Time Station? Because I truly believe that the episode that we just talked about is going to be the Shining Time Station equivalent to the Steve Goes to College arc. I actually got curious, and I did some research on the characters. And Matt and Tanya do not appear in Season 3, to my knowledge. I think that Dan and Carol are going to replace Matt and Tanya as the main child characters. Similar to how Mr. Conductor George Carlin replaced Ringo Starr, and how that guy replaced Henry. I think that this is going to be the same thing as Joe replacing Steve. And the only two actors and characters that we will have for the series moving forward will be Stacy and Schemer and the Jukebox Band. I don't know how I'm going to feel about this because I'm not a child. I wasn't a child when I watched this show. I mean, I was, but I don't remember shit about it. And I truly do not know how this is going to affect the show moving forward. Will the show remain exactly the same? Or will the general vibes of the series just completely alter with this new cast? Because with Blue's Clues, they did this in Season 4, going into Season 5. We are in the first episode of Season 2, and things are changing fast. You can't fucking do that to a kid. Kids love things that are familiar to them. They love repetition. They love the same shit over and over and over again. This is why we sing the same nursery rhymes to them. This is why many popular kids shows have a very easy to follow formula. This is why the most popular video on YouTube is fucking Baby Shark. But we are just at the first episode of Season 2, and the only way to figure out if this is going to alter the show in any way is if we keep watching. So I'll join you tomorrow for Episode 2.
Season 2, Episode 2 opens with the superintendent of the Indian Valley Railroad looking for Mr. Conductor, but Mr. C is playing little tricks on him and refusing to show himself. And just as I feared, it seems that Dan and Carolyn have officially replaced Matt and Tanya, without even the characters saying so much as a goodbye. They are not in this episode at all. We then meet a bus driver named Felix, who is an old friend of Stacy because the two of them used to do theater together. I know absolutely nothing about theater. Felix asks Stacy why she hasn't been in any of his plays in a while. She states that she's just way too busy running Shining Time Station. Then Schemer chimes in on saying, I know he's quite the actor himself, but he can be kind of hard to work with. After Schemer and the adults leave, Dan and Carolyn have a conversation about what acting really is and how it's basically just playing pretend. So their friend comes in and they pretend that they actually have jobs at the station just to mess with her. However, the game goes too far when Dan answers the phone from the superintendent saying that he is the assistant manager. And even their friend asks and receives a party to have there. While the kids are stressed out of their minds, Schemer notices their big lie and, as a form of blackmail, makes the kids their personal servants for the day and having them do all the manual labor that he doesn't want to do throughout the station. We then find out that one of the cowboy twin puppets is actually a lying piece of shit. As the kids express their frustrations to Mr. Conductor tells a Thomas tale. You know, the one where Duck got banned or whatever. I don't know, it's been a year, give me some break. I'd also like to point out that while I was editing this, I noticed that the version that I found on YouTube actually ended up editing out one of the Thomas stories entirely, which is why that edit was really weird. But the really weird part about it is that the second Thomas story is still in the episode in its entirety. I don't know, maybe Hasbro hit them with a copyright claim and they just needed to edit that out. I don't know, anything could have happened. But anyway, back to the video. The kids tell Mr. Conductor that they were just pretending and they weren't telling a lie. But Mr. C tells them that even though they were pretending, it went way too far and they really need to fix this shit. Okay, I just want to point out that I'm recording this video in February of 2024, you know, Black History Month. So it's a little awkward to see Schemer, the white man, make a little black girl do all his dirty work. I don't know, just play a song, please. God, get me out of here. After Mr. Conductor had a shenanigan with swans, he then tells the kids the story of when James got himself in a big fat-ass lie and had to deal with those consequences.
Come on, Thomas.
After the story, the superintendent stops by to find the famous person that Dan was talking about earlier. But the famous person's not there because Dan and Carolyn were lying about it. And so Stacy, Billy, that's his name, and the superintendent are all very mad at them. The superintendent in particular is very mad at Schemer because of how unprofessional and unorderly it all is. The kids have a serious conversation with Stacy and Billy, and they learn their lesson. And hey, Schemer even gets to be in Felix's next play. He gets to play Old MacDonald alongside a pig. This episode is your typical nice, heartwarming kids show story about don't tell a lie or else it's gonna go a little too far. The episode had a nice moral that you typically see in a lot of other kids shows, and it's a nice, sweet, heartwarming episode of Shining Time Station as usual. We open with Mr. Conductor playing with paddle balls with the kids. You know, I'm drinking chocolate milk while I'm recording this. It's some pretty good chocolate milk that expires in like 3 days, so I should probably drink it. A reporter shows up who looks like he's from a Dick Tracy comic, saying that he's looking for the big story, see? The big picture. And he thinks it's going to be right here, this little train station. We've got the big shot reporter walking up to the little kiddos, you see, and they seem to bring up Mr. Conductor, which he believes to be a hoax. Is it a hoax? Find out soon, folks. I promise I won't talk like that for the rest of the video. A magician shows up, and he appears to be an old friend of Harry's. This is Billy's! Fuck! So, for some reason, this guy is dressed like a traditional vaudeville performer instead of a traditional magician. Which, before you guys say, oh, maybe that's what vaudevillian magicians dress like. No, they fucking didn't. The magician attempts to do the classic rain trick, but fails horribly. The kids laugh at his misery.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
Okay, so it obviously made it black and white for the meme, but like, why the fuck does this show look genuinely good in black and white? So the magician leaves in defeat, and Stacy walks up to the kids saying that they shouldn't have laughed at his failure because adults have feelings too. And I say, bullshit. I'm 20 years old, and I don't feel shit. And it's probably because I lost all of my sense of feelings because I had to watch all of this Thomas and Friends shit for the past 3 years of my adult life. Put it on the train count, bitches! After the jukebox song, we cut to the machine shop where the magician is being a sad guy because he failed one trick. Billy then says, hey, you taught me how to do some magic, so cheer up, you sad little bitch. We cut back to the kids where they're feeling really sad about making that magician's feelings hurt. Becky says, I don't believe in magicians and magic and all that crap. And then Mr. Conductor reveals himself to this child. I need to stop phrasing it like that. After mistaking him for a doll, Becky figures out that magic is indeed real, and Mr. C tells her a Thomas story. She also knows that talking trains exist as well. After the story, the news reporter shows back up again, looking for the story. The kids tell him that a famous magician will be performing at the station, and so the reporter is happy to report this amazing story. The magician then practices in front of the children, and he actually does pretty well. The kids then ask Mr. Conductor if he can help out with the magician if he flunks during the performance. Mr. C says no and tells another Thomas story. After the story, the kids are still insistent that Mr. Conductor helps out, but he says nah and dips. It's the day of the show! We got the reporter who's trying to still get the big story. We also got Schemer who's presenting the act while also trying to do a little bit of his own act and get people to spend money at the arcade, of course. The magician is still feeling very stage fright, but then Billy talks some sense into him and gives him some words of motivation. The magician goes out to perform and fucking kills it. The episode ends with all of the characters celebrating on the fact that the story was positively received in the newspaper. This episode was pretty decent one. I wouldn't say it's anything spectacular that the show hasn't really tackled yet before, but as episodes of Shining Time Station goes, this is a charming one. Win, Lose, or Draw opens with holy freaking crap, it's Doc from Fraggle Rock. My apologies, I'm not used to recognizing actors in this show who aren't in conductor uniforms. This is Barton. He's about to go on a motorcycle race because he's cool.
This cat is going to put the pedal to the metal in a very big motorcycle showdown.
So it turns out that Barton actually brought crayons and papers for the kids to draw with because they're having their own little drawing competition. Billy walks in and shows the kids his very special magical ink, but he only says that it's magical and doesn't say what makes it magical, because foreshadowing. The rules of the competition is that the kids have to draw a person. Bethany doesn't think that she's good enough to draw a person and talks about it to Mr. Conductor. Mr. Conductor then tells her, you guessed it, a Thomas story, yay. After the story, Bethany asks Mr. C to help her with an even better picture, to which he does. Oh, and I forgot to mention that earlier she tore up the drawing, and that it was also a drawing of Stacy. So, yeah. The kids tell Schemer about their contest, which inspires him to start his own self-portrait, which he wants to make with Billy's special ink. Billy catches Schemer trying to go into his workshop, and Billy says that if Schemer needs anything, all he has to do is ask. To which Schemer then steals the ink without asking. Carolyn and Becky show off their drawings to Stacy and Billy, to which they are all very impressed, except for Becky, still thinking that she's not good enough. We cut to the jukebox band, who are talking about the events that had just occurred. And then the piano player of the band recounts a story from childhood, which is the first puppet set we've seen outside the jukebox in the entire series. He recounts a story on how his piano came to life while he was learning how to play and started playing itself, to which his mother was very impressed by and proud of his practice. However, the more the piano plays itself and the more his mom thinks that it's him playing, the more guilty he feels about lying to his mother, which, by the way, is clearly just the piano player's adult puppet in drag. Once the pianist starts playing by his own again, the piano itself says that one day, with enough practice, he will be a really good musician. And this even gains the approval of his mother. So it turns out everything about that story was basically true except for the fact that the piano came alive, which, judging by what we've seen so far in this franchise, screw it. Sentient pianos also exist. And they didn't do a song, which is actually not that bad. I quite enjoy this song they're singing. Mr. Conductor shows up to Becky once again, and she's still thinking that she's not good enough, until Mr. C tells her the story of, oh god, not this again. It still baffles me on how the creators of these shows think that this is a completely normal thing to happen in a world of talking trains. Like, someone just shows up without a face. Like, imagine if I was just walking down the street and some human being just didn't have a face. It just wasn't there. And would it be even stranger if I can actively have a conversation with this person? Like, what the frick is up with that? And it's weird that, like, Mr. Conductor is telling the story to this kid, and Becky doesn't bring up the fact that City of Tro doesn't have a face. Because, like, you know for a fact that Becky would be like, hey, I thought these trains had faces. Why doesn't this one have a face? Okay, here is my fan theory. I think the reason Mr. Conductor doesn't bring up the fact that there's no face, and that the no face thing does not bring up in the episode proper, is because Mr. Conductor was not there. Just think about it. I mean, he's not really there for, like, any of these stories. He mainly just heard, or we just never see him in general. So what if, for, like, this scenario, Mr. Conductor wasn't a part of this story, like, at all, and he only heard about what happened? Naturally, he would just assume that City of Truro had a face, like all of the other engines. And it wouldn't be weird. But then again, it's a big ceremony on the island of Sodor, and a big celebrity is there. So why wouldn't Mr. Conductor also be there? You guys think I can continue after that? That's silly. You're silly. Go home. Sweet and Sour opens with the kids opening a lemonade stand, and they do splendidly. So much so that the three of them and Schemer start to celebrate. Schemer notices how successful that they were, and so he offers them a partnership. Mr. Conductor shows up. He just got back from a race with a tortoise. He's probably gonna be a while. He chugs an entire thing of lemonade, making him the absolute throat goat. Oh, come on! We all know that is the least shocking joke to ever be associated with George Carlin. The kids tell Mr. Conductor about their partnership with Schemer, which sparks Mr. C to tell the kids the story on how Douglas murdered a fucking brake van!
Why am I not over this show? I asked if you were. Why am I not over this show? Every time, I force myself to watch an episode of Thomas and Friends or Shining Time Station. I get pleasure. These trains. These fucking trains. They call me in a way that no man and in a way that no woman ever could. Oh, the way it feels in your funnel. The way it feels to have to just wiggle around in there. It's like shoving a gerbil in your ass through a tube. Anyway, so we're introduced to Schemy, which is a schemer's nephew. I fucking adore Schemy. Basically, just schemer, but a little kid, which makes his behavior excusable. But it's not as funny because it's a kid doing it and not a grown ass man. You know, that's the thing about Schemer too. You know how, like, in previous years, I was like, man, this Schemer guy, he kind of sucks. I think it's Stockholm Syndrome. I think this is Stockholm Syndrome. I fucking love Schemer now. Schemer brings me so much joy. And I think this was the episode that made me like, okay, I'm on board with Schemer. Because he's such an asshole in this episode. But in the best possible way. Like how you want your characters to be an asshole. Simply because they're just funny, man. Like, Schemer's a funny character. His actor is a very talented comedic actor who is very well versed in physical comedy, and he does such a great job with it. Yeah, so Schemer and Schemy, they're ruining the lemonade stand. Like, they're making it a whole lot worse with, like, shitty cookies. We don't want shitty cookies. So, what are these kids gonna do? Simple. They go to Stacy and Billy. That's what they do. And Mr. Conductor tells them another Thomas story. And for those of you unaware, it's the story that gives us this.
You shouldn't murder the twins!
That's a deputation!
Suck the fucking sloppy bottle!
That's a deputation!
Did you know that some people have poo-poo in their brains?
That's a blatant backward lie!
Yeah, but still a
Deputation!
And so, yeah, a bunch of old ladies come to Schemer's stand, and they're like, these cookies are terrible. I gave them to my dog, and it was nasty. Which, why are you giving cookies to your dog, lady? That's on you. That's not on Schemer. That's on you. The kids got their newsstand. Everybody's happy. And then Mr. Conductor fucking dies.
Mr. Conductor, look out!
What was in the episode like that? Overall, I'd say this was a really, really fun episode. Because, like, you know, it made me like Schemer. It made me think, this is a really funny character. And I just thought this was a good episode. Schemer was truly the star of this episode, and I thought he was absolutely funny. He's like, that is just absolute funniest. 10 out of 10. With Shining Time Station, Season 2, Episode 6, Achoo. This episode opens up with the kids. They got a bunch of water glasses out, and they're making music. They're making music, you know, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And then we cut to the jukebox, where the jukebox band are reacting to it. And the kids keep saying, ti, do, ti, do, ti, do, over and over and over again for some reason. And the pianist, who apparently his name was Tito this entire time, thinks that he's suddenly a big star who's finally getting appreciated for his work. Then Mr. Conductor comes in, and it is very clear that he is sick with a cold. But he does not do anything about it and thinks he is just fine. And he tells them the story about Thomas and the toad, and James pretends to be sick, stuff like that. After that, his magic, Mr. Conductor's magic, is going completely haywire, you know? And it gets to the point where like only half of him leaves whenever he uses his gold dust. Stacy and Billy drink some of the water that was laid out, and they ended up switching voices. And they were like, holy shit, I guess some of Mr. Conductor's gold dust got into the waters. They think, oh, maybe if we drink more water, our voices will switch back. But no, they got animal noises. And so the kids have to figure out a way to bring Mr. Conductor back so that he can fix this. Because Mr. Conductor, he went off to the South Pole to hang out with his penguin friends. So Schemer comes in, and he's messing around with the waters, you know, making his own music. And then the balloon that they had right next to them for some reason started talking. And the balloon, dear God, it looks like this. I don't like that. The balloon starts flirting with Schemer. So I think it's safe to say that Schemer fucked the balloon. Hey, so remember that list I made of things that exist in the Thomas and Friends universe? I'm going to add flirtatious balloons to the list. And the superintendent walks in wondering where the fuck everybody is. And then he drinks some of the water. And suddenly he gets the voice of a little girl. And is wondering why he sounds like a little girl. Wondering why Schemer is talking about a balloon that's talking. And why Stacy is barking at people. Motherfucker, you know there's some magic in Chinatown Station. There's probably just some magic shenanigans. The kids put on a song in the jukebox in order to get Mr. Conductor to come back. And he comes back. And he comes back and he starts flickering. And it causes all sorts of crazy shit to happen. Even causes a penguin to come. And Mr. Conductor says the reason he came to South Pole to begin with, because he wanted to be with his friends. He wanted to be with his little penguin friends, because they're just as small as he is. And he doesn't really have a lot of friends that are as small as him. I guess he has like 0 friends on the island of Sodor. So he gives Stacy and Billy their voices back. And then the kids take care of Mr. Conductor as he finally accepts defeat, that he doesn't feel well. They make him a nice little bed. He's got his PJs on. And they tell him a story. But they don't know any good stories. So he just tells them a Thomas story instead. And when you look at that, he's all better. He's all better now. This episode was fun. I like watching some magical shenanigans episodes of Kids TV. And this was a fun one. Obviously, they couldn't go too out there. Because, you know, public access kids show. For the money they had, I'd say they did a pretty good job at making a fun little magical filled episode.
I swear to God, if I see that goddamn balloon again, I'm gonna...
A Dog's Life opens with Stacy's friend Kitty stopping by to visit her and brings little treats of what the fuck is going on? What the fuck is going on?
Hello. My name is...
Hell no, I'm getting the fuck out of here.
So, change of plans. On account of my dorm building being invaded by Mormons, I had to switch locations to being outside. So yeah, we're recording this episode outside today. This was actually not my first pick, but I tried recording in one spot, but there's a bunch of fucking bees! Yeah. But hey man, it's a beautiful day, it's sunny, there's not a cloud in the sky. I probably shouldn't be wearing a leather jacket in this weather, but the weather's been really fucked lately, so I'm just doing whatever at this point. And, you know, this is just the perfect day to record a review of a show where nothing is really outdoors. So after the kids get their little treats, Mr. Conductor shows up and tells them, of course, a Thomas story. After the Thomas story, Schemer then does a little investigating at the jukebox because he has started to notice that somebody are stealing the money out of the jukebox, when in reality it's just the jukebox band collecting the quarters. Schemer then decides that the best way to catch this thief is by installing a security system. And instead of just, you know, adding security cameras into the station like, you know, a normal boss would, he instead makes this little Rube Goldberg machine and inserts a guard dog, which is actually Kenny's dog. Schemer says that the dog is a ruthless people hater, but the dog is actually very lovable and only hates Schemer. And it's because Schemer doesn't really take care of the dog. Which is ultimately the big message of the episode, is that taking care of a dog is really fucking hard and very important. Billy scolds the hell out of Schemer because of it. The kids ask Stacy if they can keep the dog, but Stacy tells them, it's an awfully big responsibility to take care of a dog. But the kids say that they will do all the responsibilities and they get to keep it. And they leave the dog at the station immediately as they go play. Stacy ends up taking care of the dog before the kids realize that they should probably take care of it. So they feed it, they water it, and they do all the good stuff. And then Mr. Conductor tells them the Thomas story about the time a man got shit on his face. So it's getting really fucking hot right now because it's in the middle of the afternoon. So I'm just going to take the jacket off for the rest of the video and just keep the hat on. I know you're wondering, why the fuck didn't you just wear your spring outfit? It's because I left it at home, guys. God. After the Thomas story, a customer ends up getting trapped in Schemer's security trap, which ends up scaring off the customer who just wanted to spend his money at the arcade. And then the lady comes back wanting her dog back. The kids give the dog back because that's where the dog belongs. And then Schemer gets trapped in his own little trap. This episode's fine. It's cute. It gives you a message that you kind of expect in basically every other kids show. You got the dog episode where the characters gotta learn how to take care of a dog and they got big old responsibilities. It's either that or kids take care of their younger sibling. Not a bad example of this type of story, but definitely not one of the more memorable ones, but still an overall charming episode of Shining Time Station. Season 2, Episode 8, Field Day is the obligatory sports episode, in particular, baseball. Inexplicitly, Matt and Tanya are in this episode in their final appearance for the entire series. Was that a fucking ad? Mr. Conductor shows up, and the kids ask him if he's ever played baseball on the island of Sodor. He says, no, not really, so instead he tells them the story of Percy and Harold's race. And their coach, Schemer, walks in and falls immediately. He then tries to get the kids warm up by having them touch their toes left to right and do some jumping jacks. However, after these activities, the kids are tired immediately. Which, to be honest, I understand Schemer's frustration here. The kids didn't do jack shit. All they did was touch their toes and do jumping jacks. Billy then teaches the kids how to exactly throw a ball and hit a target, to which he does pretty successfully, which Schemer then tries to do to utter humiliation. On his second attempt, he gets a little closer but ends up hitting the jukebox instead, to which the jukebox band reacts. Is that another fucking ad?
Are you happy, Priceline?
As Billy continues to coach the team, Schemer is then informed about a call he got that they will instead be going off against the Slashers, which is notorious for being the best team in the valley. Realizing that they're cooked, Schemer then asks Schemy to go ahead and spy on the Slashers to see what their weaknesses are. Part of me wants to include the fact that Slashers exist in this universe as a joke idea, but I still can't get over the fact that Schemer intentionally put a hole in his hat for his hair to stick out of. We cut to the jukebox band where they are yet again discussing the events that had just occurred right in front of us. Schemy gets back from spying and reveals that he doesn't really have all that much information on the Slashers. Stacy then catches wind that Schemer has been sending kids to spy on the other team and is very disappointed in him. Yeah, what's new? Stacy says that it's all about having fun because this is really not a professional baseball game. Schemer laughs at the idea of having fun with baseball, to which Stacy then hits the can with the ball without even trying. The kids then walk in on Mr. Conductor playing checkers by himself. Turns out the reason he's doing this is because he is practicing for when he eventually does have to play a game of checkers, because practice always makes purpose. But then Mr. C says that it doesn't really matter if he wins or loses or not, as long as he has fun and he's playing up against a competitor who is also really good. Similar to the tale of Thomas and Bertie's race.
So after the Thomas story, Mr. Conductor shows the kids a public domain cartoon about having fun with sports where everyone's a winner. After the cartoon, Schemer then comes in and says, "Hey kids, I will disown all of you if we fail this game." Then the jukebox band sing the only sports song that people actually know, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," which is fucking lit. After that, Schemer then comes back to the station and he's disappointed over the fact that they lost. Meanwhile, the kids are all cheering and happy because they like the fact that they got to play a game and have some fun. To which Schemer then realizes, hey, maybe I wasn't a bad coach after all. This episode is a perfectly fine standard sports episode of a TV show that is all about having fun and not necessarily about winning. Obviously, due to the show's low budget of being restricted to the singular location of the station, we never get to actually see anybody play the game, which is kind of an important factor to have in your sports episode of seeing people play the sport. I mean, for Christ's sake, I don't even think there's a single bat in the entire episode. Not counting the public domain cartoon clips that weren't even made for the show. But regardless, it's still a fun episode of the show that teaches kids a nice message about having fun. Speaking of kids, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this episode is the final appearance of Matt and Tanya, the main titular child characters from season 1. I honestly thought that the beginning of season 2 would have been their final appearances to fully transition them from Matt and Tanya to Dan and Tasha. But it looks like that's not the case because they actually showed up for one final appearance in this baseball episode where they kind of need a lot of kids for a baseball match. And to my knowledge, after this episode, they do not show up at all and are never really even mentioned. They are just gone out of the picture with zero fanfare on where they are and what happened to them. Oh, man, are you? What will this mean for the future of the show? I honestly have no idea because I haven't watched it yet. But I do think that it will pretty much remain the same. I'm not as worried as I was at the beginning of the season on how will this affect the show, because it has pretty much proven that it hasn't really changed at all. It's pretty much the same show. I mean, these new characters are basically Matt and Tanya in every way but names, so it really doesn't change much. Plus, the addition of a third child kind of gives them more interactions between the characters with more story potentials. But there's only one way to figure out if this will forever change the show. We keep on watching. So tired.
Wrong Track opens up with Stacy about to leave off for a train. She's going to go visit her sister for a couple of days. However, Billy gets a call that all the trains have been rescheduled, so Stacy has to stay at the station, much to her dismay. So the jukebox band are sad about this happening, but do they even know them? I don't think our characters even know that these guys exist, so why the fuck do they have feelings? Mr. Conductor then shows up in a hot air balloon, and the kids are all talking about how sad Stacy must be feeling. And so Mr. Conductor tells them, "Oh my god, one of the Railway series stories." Why are they showing a season 1 episode in the middle of season 2? Afterwards, White Aunt Jemima shows up with a box of fudge for the party, and apparently the kids told her about it off screen. Then Schemer shows up and tries to talk to Stacy, but Stacy ends up yelling at Schemer due to her emotions. Schemer, being the emotionally immature adult that he is, ends up crying about it, and ends up eating the fudge to make himself feel better. And he also spends all the money that the kids were going to use for the party, because, makes him feel better? Mr. Conductor then shows up, and Becky vents to him about feeling guilty about spending all of their money. And so Mr. C does what else but tell a Thomas story. God, this show is repetitive.
So after the story, Dan and Kara come back to Becky, and they're wondering, hey, where'd the money go? What are you gonna do with the money? And then Becky was like, somebody stole it. I left it on the counter, and then somebody stole it. One of the passengers stole it. And then the rest of them are like, "What? Why'd you do that, you stupid idiot? I hate you." And then Billy comes in, and they're like, "Hey, that's not Becky's fault. It's not like she spent the money." And the kids are like, "Yeah, at least she didn't spend the money. It's okay, Becky. We forgive you." And then Becky can't take it anymore, and she confesses. She confesses on the fact that she spent the money on the arcade, and that Schemer ate all the fudge. Which, in Schemer's defense, as an overweight man with anxiety and depression, some good old fashioned fudge is the right thing to do whenever you're down, whenever you're feeling depressed, and whenever your feelings are hurt, or anything like that. That is definitely an unhealthy habit to do, but I completely understand why Schemer would do something like that. Now, the making her spend all the money, that's a little something. And even Becky admits that she could have easily just said no. Is this a metaphor for drugs? Was the arcade and the fudge supposed to be a metaphor for drugs? Because, like, with how he, with, like, the show, the audience is so young, they can't, like, straight up say, don't do drugs. Because, like, I don't know if you've noticed, but 4-year-olds don't really know what drugs are. Gamer comes back with some fruitcake. And he was like, I ate all the fudge, might as well bring some fruitcake. At least that's probably what he was thinking, I don't know. And then he apologizes for eating the fudge, and he gets invited to the party. They throw us the surprise party. Everything goes all well. Schemer's package comes in, and it's a cowboy outfit, but it's for a girl. It's a cowgirl. Womp womp. And hey, since his package came in, that means the railway and the trains are running again. So Stacy can go ahead and see her sister first thing tomorrow morning. And that episode, it was an episode. It was in fact an episode of Shining Time Station Season 2 that existed. I want to take you guys somewhere. We're in my basement right now. We are in the basement. Part of this was a spaceship at some point. Had to crash that spaceship a few years ago. That wasn't fun. But right now it's just a basement. But I want to take you somewhere. We're almost halfway through the season, not quite, but I figured I'd show you guys something special. So, see if is it in shot? That is not in shot. Okay, so I want to show you all something really special to me. Really special to me. If we could do, there we go. Okay, so right in there, right in there, right in there. In here are my Thomas the Tank Engine toys. Like, those are my Thomas the Tank Engine toys. Those are the toys that I played with when I was a kid, that my brother played with when he was a kid. We would play with these toys together, and when he was too old for them, I continued to play with them until I was too old for them. And look at this. We got Percy. Who else we have in here? We got James. We got a bunch of track from both when Tommy had the rights to Thomas, but even some of the later Trackmaster toys, we have some of that. Like even CG era Trackmaster toys. You know, like you can tell that it's like supposed to be the CG series because look at Percy's face. That's not a model. That's a computer graphic. We have an entire box, an entire other box right over here. Who else is it? We haven't gotten to this character yet, but here's Victor. Here's Victor. He's from the CG series. Here's the top half of Duck. I don't know what happened to the rest of his body. This is Connor. This is how late. This is how recent into the show I was into the show. Like up to 2013, 2014 was when Connor was introduced, and I don't remember anything about this character. I just remember playing with the toy. I don't remember something about this character. This is Charlie. I didn't really like Charlie much. It was a fun toy. Charlie kind of sucks. Who else do we have? Oh, here's another James. We got another James. Yeah, we had multiple of the same engines, because why wouldn't we? Some of my wooden railway stuff is in here. The wooden railway stuff, that's all over the place. Okay, we got one of the, this was one of the CG era diesels whose name I genuinely do not remember. Like we haven't gotten to this part of the show yet. But I genuinely do not remember what this guy's name is for the life of me. Like, who is this man? I have no idea. Okay, but what else do we have in here? We got With. This is a model character who we haven't gotten to with. I remember this guy. Because he was supposed to be very stinky man. Yeah, this is With. This one got a lot of wear and tear. Like, a lot of wear and tear from this one. Because I played with this guy quite a bit. I really liked how, his eyes looked like glasses. It was really cool. Who else do we have in here? We got Clarabelle right over here. We got Salty. We haven't met Salty yet. God, it blows my mind how we still haven't met Salty yet. Because to me, Salty's always been there, but he doesn't show up till later. That's just freaking wild to me. We got Toby. You all know Toby, right? And of course, we got Thomas. Yeah, we got Thomas. He's the star of the show. There's still a battery in him. That's pretty epic. So why did I show you all my Thomas toys instead of giving you my honest to God thoughts of the episode? Is because I couldn't think of any. Man, I thought that this would be fun. Next one.
So I didn't really feel like showing clips this time because I'm like tired. I'm really tired today. So I'll just do this episode's called Washout, and it's about thunderstorm, big old rainstorm happening at the station. Everyone's afraid, and the rain stops. That's season 2, episode 10, and Schemer and everyone's the characters. But the more important thing is that we're halfway through season 2 of Shining Time Station. And what do I have to say now that we are officially halfway through the season? Well, not much. And by not much, I mean not much in regards to Shining Time Station. But I do have a lot to talk about when it comes to the Thomas and Friends franchise as a whole. So, I started this series as it initially just being about, Thomas the Tank Engine, and yes, we will get into, the main show later on in the month, but the point is that, Shining Time Station is
simply a tangent. You know, like we're only going over every single episode just so we can have context for Thomas and the Magic Railroad. And so, like, you know, I'm doing this for Thomas. You guys were here for Thomas. And there just hasn't been a lot of Thomas this year or the year before. And I do apologize for that, but we're simply just going in chronological order, and that's just how this stuff works. But once we're done with Shining Time Station, it'll be absolutely nothing but Thomas and Friends from that point forward. But anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is, I wanted to include this segment to basically just go over how Thomas and Friends is very slowly taking over everything in my brain, because, well, like, I keep seeing, like, other people make Thomas and Friends videos, and I keep talking about the show to people, and I keep bringing up Thomas and Friends Abridged to people, and I keep making episodes of that, and, like, I just keep thinking about Thomas and Friends, and it hasn't been, like, as present in, like, the last month or so, because, just to be clear, there was, like, a month-long break in between me working on the previous episode and this one, and God only knows how long it will take me to make the next one, but Christ, it has just been, it's been a lot, just trying to, like, figure out this franchise and everything that's going on around it. And, like, we've only looked at 3 of the 24 seasons. We still have, like, a lot left to cover, and we're just about halfway through the entirety of Shining Time Station at this point. Like, we have half of season 2, we have the entirety of season 3, we have all the weird little side pieces of the franchises of Shining Time Station, and that is it. Like, that is basically all we have left to cover for this asset of Thomas and Friends history. And it's kind of crazy to think that, like, we're getting there, but again, like, it kind of has been, like, a bit of a slog to get through, mainly because these episodes are a lot more formulaic than Thomas and Friends. Like, there's more like a traditional kids show, like, structure to it, where Thomas and Friends is very much a storybook structure, which makes sense because it's based off of a kid's book. And, like, you know, Shining Time Station, like, it has these reoccurring segments. It's in the same location, episode to episode, although in the episode we just discussed, we do get to see the outside of the station for, like, a brief second. But still, it's definitely a more, like, formulaic show than Thomas and Friends, and that's mainly has been, like, my big critique with it. And on one hand, I don't really think it's fair to be constantly comparing the show to Thomas and Friends, but the sole reason this show exists in the first place is so it can present the Thomas segments. And it's kind of hard to not think about Thomas when you're watching this show. I guess I rambled on enough. Like, yeah, I started this segment with, like, an actual, like, point, but I guess at this point I'm just rambling about whatever. But yeah, we're halfway through season 2. We got about 10 episodes left to go, and we're about a third of the way through the month. And yeah, let's see you tomorrow. So for whatever reason, this episode just refused to download. So I'm just going to give you all a very brief recap on what happened in the episode from memory. So, there was this teapot. There was this teapot and teacup, actually. It was a teacup. The teacup means a lot to Stacy. And she doesn't want any of the kids to touch it. It was her grandmother's. You know, she don't want the kids to break it. Which, fair. I'm pretty sure we all have stuff like that. It means a lot to us, but we don't want any of those ding-dang kids messing with it. But lo and behold, Schemer shows up, scares one of the kids that are touching it, and then the kids drop it because they were so scared. Which, in Schemer's defense, he didn't do anything. He literally just walked up to this child and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" And then suddenly she just drops it like a klutz. But all is forgiven because it was just a chip. And Mr. Conductor's also there. And they're telling Thomas the Tank Engine stories. And yeah, that's a Crackpot. Season 2, Episode 11. So yeah, for whatever reason, the videos for this episode, there were 3 videos for the singular episode. They were all split into parts. They would not download my MP4 converter that I use to illegally download YouTube videos. Did not want to download these videos for some reason. I don't know, maybe I need some new software. But the real fun thing about it is that these videos were in awful quality anyways. Like, they were uploaded to YouTube in 2006. So, and obviously they're VHS rips because this show never got a DVD release. So you can only imagine what VHS rips from 2006 would look like. Not only, like, I mean, obviously, like, VHS rips look bad either way, but specifically uploaded to YouTube in 2006. Just imagine, just think for a moment how awful that would look, because we've used 2006 VHS rips on this show before. Just be glad that we're not doing it today. But yeah, that's it for Crackpot. Spoiler alert, the next episode is also bad. Yeah, this is another one of those cases where I just couldn't find the episode. Well, actually, I was able to find it, but it was straight up just recorded off of someone's TV. Like, somebody put the camera or the phone, whatever, placed it in front of the TV, hit record, played the VHS tape. Like, I don't think anybody wants to watch that. I didn't want to watch that. So I did not watch this episode. I have no idea what it's about. Maybe there's some crucial plot moments in there. I have no idea. Maybe the true diehard fans of Shiny Time Station are really mad about this. But personally, I don't care. Because I want good quality video to show and to watch in the video. Or else it's just not going to do. It's not going to be in here. Like, I'm not going to watch something if it looks that bad. Like, clearly just filmed off of a TV. I mean, obviously, quality wouldn't be that great anyway, it'd be a VHS rip. But either way, nobody wants to watch that. It'd be stupid. It's really stupid. So yeah, I guess that's about it. The episode's called Yabba Yabba Yabba, which I don't know what an episode like that would be about. Like, what would an episode with that Flintstones sounding title be about? Would it be like, I don't know, one of the kids wouldn't shut up, so they kept on yabbering? Would it straight up be like a Flintstones parody? I doubt it, because this show doesn't really do parodies. I don't know what this would be about at all, and it definitely got me curious to see what it would be about. But yeah, that's 2 videos in a row where I couldn't really show you the episode. I'm so great at my job.
In Nickel and a Pickle, Schemer actually gets injured by his brand new cash register, and so Doc from Fraggle Rock has to take over the arcade. But the thing is, he actually turned the arcade into a new general store. And so Schemer, who's been spying on him when he should be getting better, doesn't like the fact that he's actually better than him. So, once it's revealed that Doc wants to buy the arcade from Schemer, Stacy and the kids assure him that just because Doc did stuff differently doesn't mean that Schemer is inherently bad. So, Schemer removes all of his bandages, despite how hurt he may feel, and lets Doc from Fraggle Rock know that the arcade is his, before he eventually gets hit by the cash register again. Oh yeah, and I guess there was some Thomas the Tank Engine stories, and there was some jukebox shenanigans, but I just explained a 30-minute episode in a minute and a half. You're welcome. This episode is actually a good showcase of Doc's character. Yeah, I don't remember the character's actual name, so I'm just going to be calling him Doc for the remainder of this retrospective. Doc really does shine in this episode, and so does Schemer, as a matter of fact. Schemer's man-baby energy is probably more present in this episode than the entire series combined. He really is a child. Like, the fact that he is allowed without supervision is kind of crazy. But either way, he's still very entertaining in this episode, and I just really like seeing the guy who plays Doc from Fraggle Rock in stuff. He's just a very charming guy. Well, except for the cringe part where he tries to act cool. Other than that, I liked this episode. It wasn't bad. Nothing special, but it was a good time.
Stop the presses!
It opens up with a mime visiting the station. He then tells them where he needs to go in mime for whatever reason because he's still in character, and then he leaves. That reporter guy from a few episodes ago comes back, and he's talking about how important of a job being a reporter is to the kids because they just made hats out of newspapers featuring stories he wrote about the mayor. The kids then help Mr. Conductor straighten out a signal board so that the passengers can make it to their trains on time. After they fix it, Mr. Conductor then tells them a Thomas story where Percy had to deal with a signal. The kids decide that they want to make their own newspaper, and so they decide to call it The Shining Times. Get it? Because Shining Time Station. Anyway, so they go around interviewing a bunch of people all over the station, but none of the stories that they get were interesting at all. I mean, they get stuff that, Billy came from a tribe. Schemer loves his mother. The mayor likes the people that vote for him. So they make a bunch of fake stories to sound the stories they got more interesting. Like that Schemer is mad at his mother, or that Billy is the grandson of a tribal leader. Stuff like that. But everyone expectedly gets really mad at them over this. And so the kids are all saddened that they hurt everybody's feelings. Womp, womp. So afterwards, Mr. Conductor tells them, hey, maybe you shouldn't stretch the truth when you're trying to present factual newspapers. And, the other adults tell them that, and that is further explored in another Thomas story. After the Thomas story, the reporter guy comes back saying that the newspaper is a disgrace, and then the mayor comes saying that the reporter lied in his story, saying that sometimes the news gets wrong, and so they usually write an additional paper the next day apologizing for it. And so that's exactly what the kids decide to do with The Shining Times. So this episode is pretty standard good. Pretty good, actually. It definitely holds more water today, where misinformation gets spread like wildfire. In the era of social media, it is so much easier to find and believe in fake news than actually find the real stuff. I mean, there have been several accounts where a news site has gotten something wrong, or somebody took a rumor or even a conspiracy theory and just took that as factual evidence. So, in many ways, this children's show from 30 years ago is actually pretty relevant in 2024, which is insane to me, but good episode regardless.
This episode of Shining Time Station is a little unique from the rest of the series up to this point. For starters, this is the first ever Valentine's Day special, to my memory. I don't know, a lot of these episodes just blend in together. And second of all, this is the very first episode to only feature one Thomas segment, which is interesting and might pave the way to the future of the series, who knows. Anyway, let's move on to Season 2, Episode 15, He Loves Me, He Loves Me Not. The episode opens up with Schemer looking at a bunch of Valentine's Day cards that came in the mail, and absolutely none of them are for him. There's even a tiny little one for Mr. Conductor. Schemer's all sad about this because, nobody likes him, and it's Valentine's Day. He wants a Valentine's Day card. And he tries to sell last year's Valentine's Day candy to Stacy, and that doesn't go well. And we get a pretty weak transition to a Thomas segment trying to tie it into the rest of the episode, where Mr. Conductor is talking about the mail trade because of all the cards that go in the mail. So that just makes it appropriate for them to do Thomas, Percy, and the mail train, which, as I said, is the only Thomas segment in the entire episode. There's usually 2 per episode. This time there was only 1, which is a first for the show, and to my knowledge, it won't be the last. So, Mr. Conductor is actually going to be assisting Cupid. He does this every single year, so this year will be no different. Also, we can go ahead and add Cupid to the list of things that exist in the Thomas and Friends universe. As Mr. Conductor poofs away, he leaves behind some magical love dust. And this love dust makes somebody fall in love with the first person they see. And Stacy just so happens to walk through it, and the first person she sees just so happens to be Schemer. So Stacy is now madly in love with Schemer, much to the disgust of the children and the confusion of Schemer, because Schemer is very ignorant to what's going on at first. First, he's just absolutely terrified because Stacy is sexually assaulting him, but is played for laughs because Schemer is a man. Schemer is then asked to play their song at Stacy's request, which is the very first Picture Machine song that we got in quite a while. It was back in episode 8 of the season that we got one previously. Keep in mind, it's episode 15 now of season 2. Schemer then realizes what exactly is going on, and now him and Stacy officially start dating, and they are just the happiest of couples. The kids are grossed out by this because they know how Schemer is just not the brightest guy, and it's probably an incel. And so they go to Billy about this and say, hey, what should we do about this? And they're like, I don't know, man. I don't know. Then suddenly things get worse when Schemer and Stacy announce that they are getting married. Freaking out about this, the kids beg Mr. Conductor to fix it. But the problem is Mr. Conductor can't remember the spell that he needs to say in order to reverse it. Luckily, he remembers at the last minute before they get married that same day, like it's a freaking Disney film. And the spell not only breaks the spell, but it makes everybody forget about it except the kids for some reason. But the episode ends happily with Schemer getting a Valentine's Day card from his mother, and the kids snickering at Stacy because she says that she wouldn't get into a relationship too fast. Oh, and also the band say a love song, and Schemer sings a bad song. This episode was actually kind of fun. Seeing Stacy and Schemer be all lovey-dovey with each other is cringe, But I think the episode knows this and plays into the cringe factor and just lets it be funny. And the two are actually genuinely happy together, which is kind of nice to see, especially knowing these characters' history together. Well, like I said, the episode only features one Thomas segment, which means that it is almost entirely focused on the story of Schemer and Stacy falling in love, quote unquote. So this might be a hint on what's to come for the show's future, because I did do some research ahead of time, and there are indeed more episodes that only feature one Thomas and Friends segment throughout the entire episode, but there are significantly less episodes to feature picture machine segments, so we'll see what the future has in store for Shiny Time Station. But either way, I enjoyed this episode. Double Trouble opens up with the kids making drawings. Dan asks Mr. Conductor if he can trace him, and so Mr. C lays down on a piece of paper and Dan traces him. It's so that Dan can make a nice little drawing of Mr. Conductor, which Mr. C loves so much. Mr. Conductor leaves, but the kids notice his sparkle is left behind. Yes, it took 36 episodes and a TV special, but we finally got a name for the little dust that Mr. Conductor leaves. They straight up call it Sparkle, which will be very important come later on in the franchise. Anyway, his sparkle gets left on the drawing, which makes the drawing come to life. Oh, and I forgot to mention that somewhere between this, a Bill and Ben story gets told. So this is related to the main bulk of the episode, which is about a evil clone of Mr. Conductor wreaking havoc throughout the station, which is bad because their inspection is that day. You know, Schemer is trying to clean the arcade, but the evil Mr. C leaves a big freaking stain right there in the middle of the arcade, and Schemer is trying to use all of his cleaning equipment to remove the stain, but Mr. C's evil magic keeps on disrupting everything. And, you know, he just keeps on doing all these different evil things around the station, like changing the names of the different stations and the times and all that other stuff. And they start to realize that this can only be possible with Mr. Conductor's magic. And they assume that Mr. Conductor is responsible for all of this, which is very out of character for him. Until they realize that, oh wait, maybe it was the sparkle that landed on the picture and it brought him to life. Somehow, before even seeing the two in the same room together. And Mr. Conductor, he's all confused. He's like, wait, why are you assuming that I did this? But eventually they figure out the truth, and Mr. Conductor tells them another Thomas story to help them realize what to do to stop the other Mr. Conductor. That doesn't really help much. It was mostly just padded out filler. So they actually end up just getting him on the paper again, and he pretty much calls the evil Mr. Conductor fat, being like, I know you're fatter than me because I can fit on that piece of paper. I can fit on that outline perfectly. Go on and try. And it worked. It works. And so evil Mr. C is gone. But then the superintendent comes in. He's like, hey, Schemer, there's a big stain on there. But then Mr. Conductor uses his magic to remove it. And everyone's like, what stain? And then the episode ends. There was nothing in that mug. I was lying. But yeah, I like this episode. I actually really related with this one. Because, as many of you may know, I too have an evil twin. Well, technically we're not related. He just takes my form a lot. His name is Gendar. He's actually taken my place here a couple times. I never really liked him much, but, yeah, I never really liked him much. He's kind of evil. He's actually the reason SteamTember exists to begin with. He created the show as a way to distract people. So,
that should be a newsflash to you guy. Every time Gendar gets involved in crap, he usually makes a new show. Which, I'm me. Gendar didn't show up. Yeah, I created Theater Talk. Okay, next episode, please.
Is Anyone There opens up with Schemer, Stacy, and the kids listening to the radio in the 90s for some reason. They're listening because Schemer got a brand new radio show in the 90s for some reason. Does this show actually take place in the 90s, or is it just like whenever? I'm pretty sure it's whenever, but okay.
Listen to it. Schemers, splendiferous, phantasmagorical radio extravaganza.
The kids wonder how Schemer's going to do the radio show and run the arcade, although Schemer says that he could just do both by having the radio show be in the arcade. What could possibly go wrong? The kids all pitch various activities that they want to do on Schemer's radio show, and Schemer accepts all of them. Schemer also states that he's going to include music from his jukebox on the show, much to the delight of the jukebox puppets. Schemer and Billy get into a fight over Billy not allowing Schemer to put an ad for his radio show on one of his trains. After a bus driver stops by, Schemer then gets the bright idea to ask the bus driver to put the ad up instead. Mr. Conductor then shows up, and Billy then vents about all of his frustrations towards Schemer. And then Mr. C tells a Thomas story to Billy instead of the kids for some reason.
After the Thomas segment, Schemer is starting to set things up. Then he gets encountered by the mayor. And the mayor is like, hey, would you mind shouting out my wife's birthday? And Schemer doesn't write it down, so he doesn't remember it. The kids then show Stacy that they want to do a puppet show on the radio. And then Stacy points out that it's kind of hard to do a puppet show on the radio. And I call bullcrap. Look at Edgar Bergen. He did all of his ventriloquist acts on the radio, which made it really believable that it was real. But anyways, Stacy then showed how powerful a story can be by using just words and no visuals. Wow. See, that's why I've been doing some of these where it's just me in front of a camera. I'm not being lazy, I promise. But then the radio show starts, and Schemer seems to be knowing what he's doing for a while. But then it's time for him to play some music. And the jukebox band, they're not playing. The lead pianist, he's like, Schemer's gotta pay us more than just a nickel per song if we're gonna be on the radio. But that doesn't work. So Schemer plays one of his own records. But the record starts scratching, and people keep calling in. And the record keeps scratching, people keep calling in. And people from all over the place, such as the kids, the bus driver, and the mayor, keep barging into the show and keep making it loud. Schemer doesn't know what he's doing. And so after the band finally play their song, the broadcast cuts off. Schemer gets a phone call from the radio station saying that the show's been canceled. It was that bad. Mr. Conductor then shows up in his dapper-looking attire, being disappointed that he missed the radio show, and saying that it reminded him of the Percy and the Scarf story. Afterwards, Schemer comes back, seeming to have learned his lesson, and realized that he bit off more than he could chew, and was just not prepared to be a radio host, which is very mature for this character. Then he gets a call from his mother saying that, she really liked the show. She just wished she would have seen it. And then Schemer gets the idea to make a TV show. Hey, for all we know, maybe Schemer would be a better TV host than a radio host. Because then he could see the chaos, and it'd be kind of entertaining. Maybe he's learned his lesson, and he will imply what he's learned towards future endeavors so that he could become a better host, a better entertainer, and a better personality. Or maybe he'll just stick to running arcades and stay within his comfort zone, and the TV show just remains a little idea in that noggin of his. Of one day, he'll make it big. Anyway, that was a nice episode. Next one. Do I Hear opens up with Shining Time Station closing for the day, the kids being disappointed that they have to leave. The kids then leave, and then Billy and Stacy then leave afterwards. But the kids come running back in so that they can stay at the station for the rest of the day. Becky then plays a music video about how much it sucks to have a little brother because the brother always breaks your toys, but don't worry because he'll get older and he won't break your stuff anymore. I guess that's a good lesson. I don't know. We cut to Schemer screaming of the fact that somebody put a slug in one of his machines. He somehow gets the bright idea that maybe he'll actually get a free song out of this, and so he puts it in the jukebox. But because he called the jukebox a hunk of junk, the puppets refuse to play a song for him, and so Schemer has to call a repairman. Mr. Conductor is spring cleaning and notices that the kids are still here after closing, and so he tells him the Mavis story on how maybe you should follow the rules. And then Elvis shows up. I'm adding him to the list. This mysterious, unnamed repair guy looks like Elvis and is here to fix the jukebox machine. He opens it up and sees the puppet, but promises to keep their secret. He then grabs the little slug and then says that it's fixed because he talked to them. And so he tells Schemer to respect the machine more, complimenting his shoes in the process. He gives him the bill and leaves. Schemer then flabbergasted over the bill costing
$11.85 to fix my jukebox.
Not having that type of money, he asks the kids if they have any of the money, with Becky stating that she spent all of it at an auction. And so Schemer gets the bright idea to hold an auction at Shining Time Station. Oh, guess what? Mr. Conductor is playing hopscotch and he's telling a Thomas story. Whoop whoop! The auction is about to begin, with apparently everything being worth less than $5. The kids then see the Schemer is trying to sell personal belongings to Billy and Mr. Conductor, not to mention Mr. Conductor's station house is being blocked off due to the events, and so the Elvis guy from earlier comes by and bids on Billy's flute. Just then, Billy and Stacy show up to save the day and stop the auction. The kids then thank Elvis for showing up in the nick of time. They apologize to Billy and Stacy for staying at the station late, and they then scold Schemer for, selling all of their stuff. As Schemer tries to explain himself, Stacy points out that the bill was actually $1.87, meaning that Schemer could have paid the bill the entire time. Just then, Elvis shows up out of nowhere, and then Schemer tries to offer his shoes in exchange for fixing the machine. Elvis accepts and leaves. The band then play a song and Billy and Mr. Conductor get high. So this episode is trying to convey a typical obey your parents type of message, which is fine and standard for this franchise, but is then ruined when you realize that nothing in this episode is a result of the kids staying at the station late when they weren't supposed to. Everything is at the fault of Schemer here. The kids didn't really do anything, and they're kind of just there to witness everything. Like, if the kids didn't stay late, Schemer would still find the slug in the machine and put it in the jukebox and call the repairman and get the bill. Overall, this is probably one of my least favorite episodes with a really confusing message that I don't think the kids will get. The penultimate episode of the season opens up with everybody trying to write a different slogan for the Indian Valley Railway so that they can win the contest. After much discussion, the band decide that their pick will be... They write it down on a piece of paper and they throw it out the jukebox. Meanwhile, the two teens of Schemer and Schemy and the kids are trying to figure out what their respective slogans will be. The kids think of "we may be small but we're nice," while Schemer and Schemy think of the big mean motion machine. And to give the two of them credit, at least it rhymed. The two groups then submit their ideas, with Schemer and Schemy boasting on how their suggestion already won. The two of them then discuss amongst themselves on what the grand prize could be, since it has not been officially stated. They reach the conclusion that it could be a grand cash prize.
I love how Kara's just sitting there the whole time.
Stacy drops by and delivers some apples from the apple trees. The kids then place the apples right in front of the trees by the window. Mr. Conductor then shows up and brings up Johnny Appleseed or something, I don't know, but the important part is he tells a Thomas story. Afterwards, the jukebox band is still upset that nobody's picked up their paper. That is, until Schemer picks it up, and then immediately discards it. Billy shows up, and they all talk more about the apples and Johnny Appleseed and how Johnny Appleseed planted the apple seed and how many fucking times can I say the word apple in this one fucking apple-filled sentence filled with apples and pears. So yeah, Billy tells them the story of Johnny Appleseed, and I wasn't expecting the show to tell us the actual story of Johnny Appleseed, on how he really wasn't a nice guy. But there it is. I'm not going to accuse the show for lying to children because it was kind of common misinformation at the time. But, I don't know, it's still a little awkward to look back on. Afterwards, Schemer and Schemy bring in multiple boxes of candy, to which they say is not for the other kids and is for them only. Schemy then eats all the candy he wants. The two of them then discuss on what they would do with the money, and they pretty much reach the conclusion of buying out Shining Time Station and turning it into what they want because they have the money to do it, much to Stacy's dismay. As Schemer and Schemy leave, the kids walk up to her and ask if the two of them are really going to buy Shining Time Station. Stacy replies that as long as she is around, nothing's going to happen. Then Mr. King arrives in order to pick the grand prize winner. Stacy notices that Billy actually trimmed the branches on the apple tree, making it look all nice and all. And then Mr. Conductor shows up and tells them the Thomas story about the time Thomas was fucking owned by the narrator.
Thomas was a little engine with a long tongue.
God damn! After the Thomas story, Mr. King returns with his two favorites picked out. And it ends up being a draw between the kids and Schemer and Schemies. So as a tiebreaker, he puts both of them in a basket and picks one randomly. And he ends up picking the band's suggestion. Everyone unanimously likes it, and so that is the new slogan for the Indian Valley Railway. Everybody notices the fresh apples that were laid out, with Becky telling Mr. King that Johnny Appleseed planted the tree, with Mr. King seemingly believing the story. Mr. King then tells everybody that the grand prize was a train ride. Because they didn't know who wrote the note, everybody gets to go on the train, except for Schemy because he got a stomachache from eating too much candy. And so the episode ends with the band singing a song. This episode was relatively fun. Schemer and Schemy were obviously the highlight, with them doing what the two characters do best and just being general assholes. Plus the messages of the apples was, a little confusing, but still relatively harmless. Overall, I'd say this episode was a pretty decent time. But hey, I don't care how good this episode is because we got the season finale coming up tomorrow. Woo!
The season 2 finale, It's a Fair, opens with the characters preparing, simply because the state fair is upon us. And so they're going to be closing the station a little bit early in order for the state fair. Mainly because Stacy is going to be participating in the fair by making a bunch of pies, and Schemer is going to be participating by making a pie flinger, where somebody can put their face in a hole, there's a little catapult, and pies them in the face. So, Billy and the kids are left in charge of Shining Time Station. And with the station being run by a bunch of children, it goes just about as well as you would think it would. But yeah, those are a whole bunch of different shenanigans. Weirdly enough, Schemer's plot actually seems to be going pretty well for him. Like, he makes a thing that can hit you in the face with a pie, and that machine works, and he's not doing anything malicious or evil or greedy. He's just making up pie people in the face machine for the state fair. Now, the real interesting part of this episode is when Mr. King shows up. Now, throughout this entire show, we have been seeing a running gag on Mr. King trying to find Mr. Conductor, but Mr. Conductor always manages to escape him, implying that him and Mr. Conductor are really good friends. Well, it turns out that Mr. King only met Mr. Conductor once when he was a very small child, as he tells to the kids. He was really young, and the train was late, and he didn't think he'd be getting home. Until Mr. Conductor shows by and tells him a poem. But Mr. King forgets half the poem because of how young he was. But when Mr. Conductor told him the poem, he knew that he'd be getting home safe. And he did. Afterwards, he knew that Shining Time Station was his home. And that is a very interesting lore drop for the character of Mr. King, because it does imply that maybe that's the reason he became superintendent of the Indian Valley Railway to begin with, so that he can find that strange little man again. Afterwards, Mr. Conductor does show up, but not to reveal himself to Mr. King, not yet. Instead, he shows Mr. King a video on the viewing machine, which shows just that. A little kid, lost in the train station, but eventually finds his way home. And after the video, Mr. King remembers the poem. It's actually a very sweet moment, and it's probably my favorite scene in this entire show that isn't from Thomas the Tank Engine. I've always really enjoyed the character of Mr. King, on how it's a very unrealistic point of view from like a billionaire, but tugs at the heartstrings. This moment does. I don't know why I said that with like Yoda, but it's a good moment. But things, however, go astray when Stacy comes back and she puts her pies down, but Schemer ends up swapping the pies. That is probably the closest thing to a malicious thing the Schemer did in this entire episode, but in Schemer's defense, he sees a pie, and he didn't even know they were Stacy's to begin with, so he just took them. But, anyways, the kids are still freaking out because they're running Shiny Time Station all by themselves and they have no idea what they're doing. And then afterwards, the band play a song. And so they all talk to Mr. Conductor, and then Mr. Conductor tells the only Thomas story of the episode. Yes, forgot Thomas the Tank Engine was part of the show. And much like the Valentine's episode, this only has one Thomas segment, and it has fucking Trevor in it. I knew this episode was too good to be true. But anyway, the episode goes by, and then the mayor comes in because he's in charge of the pie eating contest for some reason. I don't know why they put the mayor in charge of that, but the mayor is in charge of it. And he tastes the pies that were laid out that are actually Schemers, and they taste awful, which makes sense because they're meant to be thrown into someone's face and not to be eaten. However, Schemer throws the actual pies, Stacy's pies, into his face through his catapult, and the mayor, he actually really likes it. And so everybody comes inside with a bunch of dancers and acrobats and clowns and whatnot, all for the fair because the train was ready.
And so, season 2 of Shiny Time Station ends with Billy finally enjoying some peace and quiet at the railway before Mr. Conductor comes in as loud as possible on his brand new bike. But him and Mr. Conductor are tight, so it's okay. This episode was a lot of fun. I don't know if it works as a season finale outside of the whole Mr. King and Mr. Conductor arc, and it doesn't even get resolved at the end. They still have not reunited or met, because remember, those are different people from season 1 and season 2, but I still really enjoyed this episode, and it's very charming and pretty emotional at parts. And folks, that was Shiny Time Station Season 2. I'd like to end our discussion of the second season of Shiny Time Station by revisiting something that I discussed at the beginning. How big of a change was it from Shiny Time Station Season 1 to Shiny Time Station Season 2? The short answer is not as bad as I thought it would be. Well, let me explain. For those of you that are starting here for some reason, at the beginning of Season 1, I made the comparison to Matt and Tanya leaving and being replaced by Dan and Kara to Steve leaving Blue's Clues and being replaced by Joe, and how much of a huge change that was to the kids watching at home. After watching the entirety of Season 2, I can ultimately say that it is definitely not as bad as Steve leaving Blue's Clues. Oh my god, why did I even compare it to that? Point is, these two characters are so similar to Matt and Tanya that you hardly even notice the difference between them. Now, the same can't really be said for Harry being out of the picture and being replaced by Billy, because Billy and Harry are two distinctly different characters personality-wise. Harry definitely gives the impression of the warm grandfather type that can get a little angry at sometimes, while Billy gives much more of a father figure type of personality, the one who you know that you can go to whenever things get rough, and is generally more calm when he is approached with just about any circumstance, which is much healthier for a kids show. Not to mention, the show has been pretty consistent in keeping a similar tone to that first season. Not really changing a whole lot on how the show really works thematically and structurally, although there are significantly less viewing machine segments and musical segments outside the jukebox band. But overall, I would say that Season 2 of Shining Time Station is more of the same, more or less. We definitely get to see a lot more side characters and recurring side characters compared to the first season, definitely making the world of Shiny Time Station, for lack of a better word, shine more compared to Season 1. Although I will admit, whenever they decide to include Season 1 episodes of Thomas and Friends for the Thomas segments, especially later on in Season 2, it is definitely distracting, to say the least, because for me, I saw these episodes years ago and suddenly here they are. But that's more of me thing. Plus, it's just kind of weird that they're using them when they still have all of Season 3 at their disposal that they can just use already. But regardless, Season 2, still a very strong season of children's television. And with that, we are officially done with our discussion of Shining Time Station Season 2, and tomorrow we shall be moving on to Thomas and Friends Season 4. Now, this season is going to be a very interesting season because it is technically the end of an era, but not really. And when I say that it's the end of an era, I mean that this is going to be the very last time we will hear George Carlin as the narrator for Thomas and Friends, because this was indeed the last season he dubbed over episodes for the show. And this will also be the final season to feature episodes that are directly based off of stories written by the Reverend W. Awdry. So this is definitely going to be a pretty big season. Not to mention, a ton of new engines have been introduced in Season 4, so the train count this season is going to be very special. That will all be happening tomorrow. I would just like to thank you guys for joining me for Shining Time Station Season 2 for the entirety of September this year thus far. It's been an absolute blast to do this again. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified on when future SteamTember videos will be uploaded. But until then, I will see you later. Bye!